What we will do now is apply the work with object for smart devices and see what happens. I open the country transaction and I select the Work With for Smart Devices tab and apply it. And what we see here is that unlike Work With for Web, which had the instance file that programmed all the actions and then were implemented in GeneXus objects, let's close these. While in this case, the Work With object itself is the object that implements the sub-objects. Here we see the list. And here we see the detail node, which also has a layout and only has a section container. And the sections are here below, the general section and the speaker section. We save and see what happens. But before saving, I will edit the properties of the country transaction and then look closely at this business component property, which by default is set to false. In addition, I want to return here and show that we only have this generator for now. Note that below country, we have the Work With country for web. Perfect. Now I will save and we'll see what happens. First, below country, we see the Work With devices country object, which in this case is a GeneXus object. If we open the properties, we see that the business component property is now set to true. In addition, when doing so, the property expose as web service has been changed. It has been set to true. And the access protocol to the web service is now using REST. The other possibility was to use SOAP. What else has it done? We said that we can access the Work With object both from the Patterns tab of the transaction and directly by opening the object. It's the same. So first, we could ask ourselves why the business component property is set to true. The answer will be that the way to update information, in this case the countries, for the smart devices application will be through business components instead of through the transaction. Why? Because the transaction is run on the web. We will review and look closely into this in a while when we talk about architecture. In addition, we select the Preferences node and the Generators node and see that the Smart Device Generator has been automatically added. This generator, among its properties, shows that it will generate for Android by default and also for iOS. Also, the main platform in which the application will be tested when prototyping will be Android, and it can be changed, of course. We will disable the Generate iOS option because we will make the test with Android, using the Android emulator that it offers. This emulator comes with the Android SDK and will be open to allow us to prototype without having a device. The objective will always be to prototype using a device because it looks much better, and because the device offers all the functions that the emulator lacks. However, in this course, we will use the emulator because it's easier. So here, we show where the SDK folder, etc. are located. We will do the same with Speaker. We may open the Patterns tab directly and apply the pattern, or do it directly as we had done with Work With Web, apply pattern, and select the one remaining, Work With for smart devices. We see that the pattern has been automatically selected, and here we can see the screens that implement the list and the detail. Now, what's missing to be able to try this application in the Android emulator? We're missing the Start menu and the main object for the app, that is to say, the dashboard. So, we select File, New Object, and here we see the 4 types of specific objects for smart devices. Note that one of them is the theme for smart devices, which we will talk about later. and then we select the dashboard, and we will call it EventDay. We create it. The dashboard is just a menu. And here, by clicking on the Items node, right-clicking, and selecting Add, we will add an action. Note that the Object Selection dialog is being opened. What we will do is call the Work With Devices country, that is to say, the countries list. Here, in the Properties, we will change the default value, and we'll enter Countries to display it in the dashboard. And we will also assign an image to this item. Because it's Android, it'll be shown in a table by default. We'll import a file with the image we want this option to have in the dashboard at runtime. So we will search in the images we have. I will add this image, and to do so, I will import it as an image object that in GeneXus will be called in this way. I click on OK and import it. I will do the same, which is to add an action to invoke the Work With Speakers list. I will also change the description, enter speakers, and I will also associate an image imported from one of my files as an image object in GeneXus. Perfect. Note that, since this is a dashboard, by default, the main program property has been set to true, because in general, dashboards are used as a point of entry of the application. So once we have an SD object as main object, a group of properties will be opened, such as the title that the application will have. We will call it EventDay. And among the things we can configure, for example for the Android application, we will want to indicate the icon that will be displayed in the application, both in the marketplace and also in the device itself in its applications. Again, we will import the image that we will use. We enter the name Android for this image object imported in GeneXus. We can also indicate the image we want to display when the application is opened, when the vertical screen is opened, and the image we want to show when the application is opened in horizontal mode. That is to say, landscape. So here we can also enter images. This one would be for portrait, and an image for the landscape mode. Perfect. Everything's ready to test our application. How do we go about prototyping an Android in this case? We already knew that the F5 key would always open the developer menu for web. It would be automatically opened and the developer menu showed the objects that could be called directly because they didn't receive parameters, web objects. Let's see what happens now when we press F5. We can anticipate what the web application will generate as usual. That is to say, the browser will be opened and the developer menu will be opened, with some differences that we will examine now. In addition, the Android Sdk Emulator will be opened with a program called KBN, which we will talk about soon. It's a kind of browser to navigate our smart device objects. What kind of objects? Our objects, those developed with our applications in GeneXus. First of all, we see that here is the developer menu with the same elements it had before, but now these QR codes are also added. There's a QR code to download the KBN in iOS. And KBN is an acronym that means Knowledge Based Navigator. In addition, here's the QR code to download the application we're developing, EventDay for smart devices, for Android, compiled. This is blurred because it hasn't been compiled, because there is no QR code yet to download the application. At the same time, the Android Sdk Emulator has been opened. This is an emulator I've configured, and inside the emulator, the GeneXus 15 KBN has been opened. Here we can see the dashboard URL. If we tap on it, we see that this dashboard is being run, where if we tap on the countries option, we see the list of countries. We can choose one, Uruguay, and read its detailed information, the general information in this tab, and the speakers of Uruguay in this tab here. We can also see the options to edit the country's general information. And here we can change its name. And if we open the list of speakers and select, for example, this speaker, Alejandro, what we will see is the view detail of the speaker that will be opened. There are no tabs here because the speakers don't have subordinate information. So here, we're viewing all the fields in view mode. For example, here we can see this small icon over the country Uruguay. Why is this image displayed? Because tapping on Uruguay takes us to the detailed information about this country. Why? Because Uruguay is a foreign key for the speaker, we see how the information is automatically related. In addition, we can see that his phone image is displayed. What does it mean? That when we tap on this field, the program installed on our device to make phone calls will be automatically open for us to make the call. Here we can see how we're interoperating just by setting this attribute domain to phone with the native functions of the device itself. In the same way, if Google Maps is installed on the Android device and we've set the address field to address type, a semantic domain, these semantics will be incorporated in that field, and it'll offer us the chance to tap on the image and then open the Google Maps program to show the address on the map. Likewise, if we had an email program installed on the device, in this case, the action is not supported because the emulator doesn't have it installed, it would also be open to send an email directly to the speaker. In addition, we can edit the speaker's information and change their details. For example, what happens if we delete the name of the speaker and try to save? We see that the message we had incorporated in the error rule programmed at the speaker transaction level is now being displayed. So why is this rule being triggered? Because it's trying to run the transaction in a silent manner, that is to say, through the business component. We will see this soon when we discuss the architecture. But for now, we can see that the changes made to a speaker are implemented through the business component, and that the rule is triggered to prevent it from being saved. We had also said that another way to access this edit screen was through the speakers list. If we open the speakers list here, we can see all the speakers we have. Among the actions offered in the screen, we can insert a new speaker. The insertion invokes the same screen we saw before, only now it's used to insert a new speaker. If we go back and select this speaker, for example, another interesting action we may want to do is change its image by taking a photo with the device camera or selecting an image from the image gallery. Or, for example, we may want to change the country, which was the United States. And we can see when we click here on that image, this other panel is opened. For example, we select Uruguay and it's loaded. This panel is a selection list automatically created by GeneXus because it's a primary key attribute, which here is a foreign key. If we open GeneXus, we see that it's automatically created this object, very similarly to the countries list, and that this is a panel for smart devices. Selection list country is of panel for smart devices type. Okay, we can save this. After saving, a message is displayed to inform us that the data has been successfully updated. Once again, it has been done by the business component. In addition, the Work With object also allows us, for example, in the speakers list screen, to filter, run a search by name, for example. We can type ALE, and we see that it shows all the speakers who have ALE in one of the places where the application is running the search. Obviously, it's his name, but we may ask ourselves, why are these speakers included in the list, Guillermo and Gustavo, if none of their names contain the string ALE? Well, if we open the implementation of this Work With object, the speakers list, and we click on its grid, we see a group of properties below the data group: the order property, search, conditions, and base TRN. Among which, for example, in the search property, we find that all these attributes are specified to work as filters. So why weren't these speakers included when we typed ALE? Because this substring is in one of these other fields. We can customize this by deleting or adding fields, of course. Let's look at this advanced search country ID. We open the application, go back, and see there's also another button here. That button opens this filter screen, which offers the option to filter by country. So I can specify the country I want to filter by, Uruguay, and by selecting search, only the speakers from Uruguay will be shown. As we said before, this is programmed here in advanced search in this condition to return only the speakers corresponding to this country. In addition, we can also pay attention to the order in which the speakers are listed. We see that there is an order defined for this grid, which is by speaker name. And if we select the speakers list, without the filter, we see that they're effectively being ordered by speaker name. All this, the information being displayed, the way in which it is displayed, can be customized. Here we can see that this information will not satisfy any user. Actually, many design features are missing from this panel to be acceptable as an end-user application. That's why we can already see that it's programmed like all the other GeneXus objects, in this part of the Work With object in this layout. Alright, we've seen that the KBN, which is the only element we've run so far, is like a type of developer menu, but for smart devices. It's not advisable, as we'll see later, to use the KBN to prototype with Android. We will want to prototype the compiled application, and for now, we're just showing their similarities. We will need the KBN essentially for iOS. Here, as we've said, we will have the URL of the application compiled for Android. And here we said that we had the interpreter to be used when using an iOS device, as long as we don't have a Mac to compile the applications. It's always preferable to prototype with the compiled application, but this option isn't always available in iOS. This is the reason why this KBN is provided to interpret the application, as we will see when we study the app's architecture. Here we can see the screens that have been displayed. Since at the beginning, we were running the dashboard, from one of the options, we accessed the Work With Devices country list, and tapping on one of the elements, we accessed the detail in view mode, where we saw general information and the speaker's details. Tapping on one of the speakers, we displayed the information of Work With Devices speaker directly from the detail. And we saw how the entire information was related without doing anything, just by having applied the patterns. We had also seen how these icons were displayed to run the various programs according to the field semantics. Okay, lastly, we had seen that we could also access the detail screen in edit mode, both from the speakers list, as in this case, and from the view of a certain speaker. There we had seen how an error occurred when the field was left empty, and we had also seen the selection list. We also saw the filters and how GeneXus automatically created the selection list. It's now time to study the architecture of these online mobile applications. Offline applications will be discussed at the end of the course.